At 0430, the alarm clock lit up in the darkness like a silent command. But Sarah Mitchell had already been awake for 10 minutes. She lay still in her standard-issue base housing bed, eyes open, tracking the slow spin of the ceiling fan and the breathless hush of pre-dawn. The room was spare and functional. One blanket folded military tight, one uniform hanging sharp as memory, one framed photo turned just slightly away on her nightstand. No decorations, no clutter, nothing to catch a stranger's attention. She moved with quiet precision. Toothbrush, water, bun pinned high. No wasted motion. By 0442, she was fully dressed and ready, her boots laced to regulation, her collar aligned, insignia gleaming under the faint glow of the hallway light. The reflection in the bathroom mirror was plain, unremarkable. Dark brown hair pulled back tight, cheekbones high but understated. The kind of face most people forgot a moment after seeing it. That was the point. At 0515, she stepped into the chill desert air. The base was still asleep, save for the hum of faraway generators and the occasional clatter from the motor pool. She walked alone, past rows of blocky buildings and flight line hangars, toward the administration center. The scent of jet fuel and faint machine oil hung in the morning air. It always made her heart beat faster. Always had. Inside the building, Sarah moved through the halls like a shadow. She brewed coffee for the office staff, cleaned the mug rims, replaced the filters. When the others arrived around 6:45, the pot was full and the lights were on. Most didn't greet her. Some nodded. Fewer remembered her name. Captain Mitchell. They barely used her rank. Just her, or the admin, or when they thought she couldn't hear. The diversity pick. She said nothing. Always nothing. She filed reports, edited logistical summaries, caught inconsistencies in parts requisitions no one else noticed, fuel usage projections, training rosters, flight safety audits. The paperwork that held the skeleton of air operations together. By 07:10, she had already flagged a discrepancy in the maintenance logs for an F-16 from the night before. She left the sticky note beside the log binder. No one would know it was her. By 07:30, the office buzzed with casual talk. Weekend plans, basketball scores, aircraft rotation chatter. She kept her head down, typing at speeds that no one tracked, correcting minor calculation errors in tactical route sheets. She never interrupted, never joined in. Her voice, when it came, was soft and precise. Rare. At 08:05, a new officer dropped a form on her desk without looking. Need this cleaned up. Mitchell. He turned and walked off. The form was a disaster. She rewrote it entirely, checking figures against flight simulator logs and matching inventory IDs. It would be submitted under his name. She worked with the quiet focus of someone used to being underestimated. Her hands moved with certainty. Her notes were tight, factual, but the careful observer might have seen something else. Tiny scars along the sides of her index fingers, faint calluses just above her palm base. The wear pattern of someone who had held something for a very long time, something like a stick, a throttle quadrant, a yoke. At 0900, she stepped into the break room, poured herself exactly half a cup of coffee, and sat at the back table with a small technical manual. Emergency Avionics Systems, Block F revisions. No one else paid it any mind. Most assumed she just liked reading. They never saw how she traced flight patterns across the edge of the table, how her eyes darted between line diagrams like they were old friends. Around 10:12, a junior technician cracked a joke about base hiring quotas, something about checking the right box to get a uniform. One of the others laughed, jerking his head toward Sarah's desk. Right there. Perfect example. They laughed again. Sarah's posture never shifted. By noon, the sun blazed over the flight line. F-16s idled in the distance, heat shimmer dancing off the tarmac. Sarah took lunch at her desk, eating a turkey sandwich while annotating revised fuel consumption sheets for the upcoming drill. At 12:40, she stood and walked to her locker. Behind a spare uniform, tucked into the corner, hung a small dream catcher, faded blue string, white beads dulled with time. She ran her fingers over the worn surface, just once, then let it go. The locker closed with a soft click. At 13:15, she overheard two senior officers in the hallway debating training cycle efficiency. One referenced the wrong protocol sequence for emergency response drill times. Sarah noted it quietly, and later rewrote the drill memo to match the actual standard. No credit requested, none given. At 14:23, the printer jammed. She fixed it. At 14:31, a requisition officer handed her 5 unsigned clearance sheets. She walked them over to the captain herself. He nodded absently. Didn't look up. By 15:45, she had corrected a logistical cross-tracking error that would have delayed a flight readiness report by 48 hours. She submitted it anonymously. At 16:30, she filed her last report of the day and packed up. As she stepped outside, the low whine of an A-10 echoed overhead, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Her eyes followed it. The sound triggered something deep in her chest. Muscle memory. A reflex. Her fingers twitched, invisible on her thigh, tracking its turn vector. It was off by a few degrees. She said nothing. The pilot would figure it out. The wind caught the edge of her collar as she walked across the tarmac. No one saw her. No one thought to ask why she walked like a pilot long grounded. No one knew what she had once flown, what she'd once fought for, or why she chose silence. They saw a quiet woman in standard boots, holding a folder of forms. She saw the base with a precision no one else did. She knew every runway, every comm protocol, every blind spot. No one noticed the way she always walked with her back straight, as if carrying something heavy that couldn't be put down. Tech Sergeant Kevin Chen wasn't easily impressed. He had been stationed at Edwards Air Force Base for 5 years and rotated through everything from radar tech to logistics support. He knew the rhythm of the place, knew how most personnel operated when they cut corners, who ran clean reports, and who just knew how to fake looking busy. But Captain Sarah Mitchell didn't fit any category he could explain. He first noticed it during a routine readiness drill at 0850, when 2 F-16s were adjusting their holding pattern. The tower was processing new vectors, and Chen sat in front of the radar display, listening to the chatter across 3 frequencies. Before tower even transmitted the new pathing, he caught Sarah whispering the adjustment under her breath. It wasn't a guess. She had called the correction within a single degree. Later that week, she corrected the flight fuel distribution reports for the 433rd without access to the tanker logs. She didn't even hesitate, just underlined the discrepancy with a red pen, stapled it back, and slid it into the inbox like it was nothing. The numbers were dead on. Chen confirmed them himself against secure archives. That didn't add up. By 16:00 on Friday, his curiosity had crept far enough to act on. He waited until the building cleared and accessed the personnel database from his secure console. Her file came up quickly. Standard Army formatting. Training record from Laughlin Air Force Base. Basic OCS notes. Admin evaluations. It all looked fine. At a glance. Too fine. Chen leaned closer. Her record began in 2022. Nothing before. Not even ROTC records. No academy background. Just a middle-of-the-pack performance score and a faint note about reserve logistics specialization. And then he spotted the first gap, a 6-month period marked administrative transfer pending verification. Vague. No location listed. No commanding officer signature. There was another blank period 4 months after that. Her physical training records were unusually lean, except for an appendix tucked deep in a metadata tab. That's where it got strange. Reaction time tests logged at 99th percentile. Spatial awareness flagged as evaluation suspended due to data sensitivity. What did that even mean? Chen pulled deeper. He used his clearance to access system-level file histories. Sarah's simulator results were buried in an old offline record cluster, labeled administrative familiarization, but these weren't beginner scores. She had flown 6 aircraft types in simulation, including F-16s, A-10s, and even a classified UCAV interface trial. Her scores weren't just good, they were perfect. He ran a cross-check on training locations. Every gap in her file aligned with known Black Project test corridors, Nevada Test Range, Groom Lake, Tonopah. None of those assignments were in her file. Of course, but the timing was too clean. She had been present at each during the precise windows of unlisted operations. Too many coincidences stacked in the same direction. Then, he found the reference. One of the admin logs tied to her earliest entry had a redacted comment in the notes column. It mentioned a project closure summary from GHXR07. The tag wasn't familiar, so he ran it through the internal keyword index. Only one result: an old, classified report with 3 words: unredacted pilot, Ghost Hawk. Chen leaned back in his chair. He could hear his own breathing. Ghost Hawk was a ghost story on base, a myth among test pilots and engineers. The call sign whispered during simulator resets and in late-night maintenance briefings. A pilot who had flown aircraft that hadn't been officially acknowledged. Someone who had testified during closed-door hearings on AI-integrated fighter safety. Someone who had disappeared after wrecking a billion-dollar drone program and vanishing into thin air. No one knew who Ghost Hawk was. The files were locked behind a chain of D-class dates so thick even Base Command probably didn't know. But now Chen was staring at her personnel record, watching the gaps line up like coordinates. Sarah Mitchell. Always early. Always quiet. Never invited. Never questioned. The woman who poured coffee before anyone else arrived. Who tracked runway loads better than the logistics team. Who watched every aircraft lift from the ground like she was remembering it. He shut the file at 1737, heart beating harder than it should. He hadn't found proof. Not exactly. But he'd seen enough to know he'd brushed against something buried for a reason. And whoever Captain Mitchell really was, she hadn't landed at Edwards by accident. At Euro 755, the main briefing room inside Building C of Edwards Air Force Base filled with the rustle of uniforms and the scrape of chairs, rows of officers settled in, murmuring over weather conditions, sortie timing, and next week's training evolution. Captain Sarah Mitchell entered quietly, file folder in hand, and took her usual seat near the back wall. She didn't make eye contact. She never did. She sat straight, pen ready, back pressed to the metal chair like every briefing still mattered. At 08:00 sharp, Colonel Bradford entered, his boots hitting the tile like a metronome of authority. He wasn't a man who enjoyed silence, but he commanded it well. His presence alone usually bought the first 10 seconds. Today, he wanted more. He slapped a manila folder down on the podium so hard it cracked the silence like a shot. The front row flinched. Several others glanced up. Sarah didn't move. Bradford's voice dropped low. The kind of low that filled every inch of the room. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," he said slowly, as if tasting the name, weighing it for defects. "Would you stand, please?" She did. No hesitation. No visible reaction. Just rose from her chair with the calm of someone used to being called out. Bradford opened the file theatrically, flipping pages like an actor in rehearsal. "We've got 5 typos in one logistics report. Fuel estimates from a training flight that don't align with payload figures. Redundant entries in maintenance schedules. Sloppy work. Captain, would you like to explain why these are showing up in your file?" Sarah kept her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on a point behind him. "Sir, those were reports submitted to me from other departments," I corrected. He cut her off with a sharp, sarcastic laugh. "Oh, of course. Always someone else's mistake." "Right." Someone near the front stifled a chuckle. It echoed like a sneer through the rows. Bradford stepped away from the podium, holding up a single page. "This right here. An authorization form you reviewed. You initialed next to a fuel rate that would ground half the aircraft in our rotation. You think that's acceptable. I flagged that rate in a memo, sir, she said. It was overridden by. Bradford closed the distance between them. Do you ever take responsibility, Captain? Or is this all part of the image? The word image hung in the air like smoke. You know what I see when I look at your file? He continued. I see someone who got in under the wire, checked a few boxes, Native American heritage, female, quiet enough not to cause trouble. That sound about right. No one in the room moved. A few looked away. Some just stared. I've read your evaluations. Middle range everything. Not a single standout qualification. No flight status. No deployments. You're 28 years old and you file fuel reports. He stepped closer. Tell me, Captain, how does it feel to wear a rank you didn't earn? Sarah didn't blink. Her jaw didn't twitch. She stood there, unmoving, letting the words pass over her like dust on plexiglass. Bradford circled her like he was lecturing a room full of cadets. You know what's wrong with the modern military? This, political quotas dressed in pressed uniforms. We're not here to check boxes. We're here to win wars. Behind her, someone exhaled. A junior lieutenant near the door looked like he wanted to vanish. Bradford turned back to his folder. 28 years old and not even cleared for cockpit duties. You think that's acceptable on a base like Edwards? She said nothing. Of course you don't. Because you're not here to fly. You're here to fill a seat, submit the right form, smile just enough to stay off anyone's radar. Well, guess what, Captain? It's not enough. I don't care what background box you checked on your commissioning paperwork. This Air Force is not a social experiment. The silence that followed was colder than the air conditioning. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't move. Even her breathing was still. Bradford tossed the file onto the podium and stepped back. You can sit down now. She did. The room shifted, but no one really settled. The rest of the briefing blurred, filled with clipped updates and dry bullet points. The laughter that had followed Bradford's first remarks didn't return. Something about the way she had stood completely still, completely unbroken, made it hard to look at her directly now. Chen, seated 2 rows behind her, stared at the back of her head. He hadn't joined the laughter. He hadn't looked away. He had seen the twitch in her left hand when Bradford mentioned flight status. Not anger, not shame. A memory, maybe. Muscle responding to something deeper. At 08:49 the meeting ended. Officers stood, papers shuffled, chairs scraped again. Sarah gathered her file, stood smoothly, and walked out before anyone else. Her stride didn't change. Bradford stayed behind, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like he'd just finished a lesson. But the room felt different, quiet, in a new way. Outside, the sun beat down on the runway. A jet passed overhead, high and distant. In another few hours, everyone would return to their routines. But not all of them would forget what they saw. And some of them would wonder about her silence, her eyes, and the way she'd absorbed every insult without flinching, like she'd heard far worse, like maybe just maybe the wrong person had been underestimated. 3 years before anyone at Edwards had ever heard the name Captain Sarah Mitchell, she sat strapped into the cockpit of an experimental drone interface simulator deep beneath a secure hangar in Nevada. Her call sign back then wasn't on any publicly accessible flight log. Her face never appeared in press briefings or PR footage. She flew prototypes that didn't officially exist and tested AI systems that were still under congressional blackout. Her clearance level bypassed most generals. She earned it the hard way by flying what others refused to touch. She had known something was off during the 4th trial run of Prometheus Defense Corporation's autonomous strike drone, the XR-29. The system lagged by less than half a second on altitude correction inputs. Barely measurable, but enough to destabilize control under real-world stress. On Run 5, that delay pushed her virtual profile into a stall cascade during terrain-following maneuvers. She had survived only by hard-cutting the link and going manual. Her hand still shook when she climbed out of the cockpit. The AI hadn't learned. It had imitated poorly. She wrote the anomaly report in full, detailing failure probabilities and override flaws. The next day, the report vanished from the system. When she questioned it, a Prometheus supervisor told her not to worry. A week later, she was pulled from the test rotation and assigned to evaluation standby. The message was clear. Stop asking questions. At 1840 on a Friday, she sat alone in a secure briefing room, a flash drive in her hand and a choice to make. Speak up and burn her career, or stay silent and let the flaw continue. The drone was due to enter low-rate production within the month. She had flown with her gut and her life for too long to ignore what she knew. The next morning, she requested a confidential audience with her Pentagon handler. The hearing happened behind closed doors. No media, no transcripts available to the public. She sat across from 6 federal officials, 3 of them senators, and explained in careful detail how Prometheus had falsified test data, overridden red flags in diagnostics, and misrepresented the drone's safety margins. She gave them her flight logs, her simulator outputs, her annotated checklists. It was enough. Within 72 hours, the XR-29 contract was suspended. Prometheus shares dropped 9 points overnight, but the fallout didn't stop there. The threats began almost immediately. Encrypted emails, voicemail clips from burner numbers. A maintenance worker she'd never met slipped a note under her windshield at 2312 warning her to watch her back. Counterintelligence confirmed a possible contract had been issued through a foreign subcontractor linked to Prometheus. They called her in at 0630 on a Sunday and gave her 2 options: resign quietly and disappear on her own, or accept government-backed witness protection and vanish under a new name. She chose the second. Her original identity was sealed, her awards locked under classified code, her records scrubbed. She boarded a blacked-out transport from Andrews Air Force Base at 03:05 with a single duffel bag and a sealed envelope. By the time she stepped onto Edward soil months later, she wasn't a top test pilot anymore. She was Sarah Mitchell, Reserve Logistics Officer. No wings, no history. Just a name no one could trace and a silence she had agreed to keep. She had traded glory for survival, service for shadow, and no one watching her now had any idea who she used to be. Chen didn't sleep that night. Not really. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the glow of his monitor still etched in his vision. Something in Sarah Mitchell's file was wrong. Not just clerical wrong, deep wrong. He kept running over the gaps in his head. The way her record seemed built to pass inspection but not scrutiny. At 0418 he got up and went back to the base secure systems terminal. He used a Tier 3 maintenance override to access archived personnel audit logs. The first anomaly came from her flight simulation record. It was categorized as administrative training, flagged for non-rated personnel. But the sim data told a different story. She didn't just complete basic patterns. She ran advanced combat maneuvers in multi-aircraft engagements. Sim types included F-16C, A-10C, T-38, and a drone remote interface protocol that wasn't even part of the official catalog. Each run showed perfect scores on reaction time, threat prioritization, and situational correction under simulated failure. He opened her physiological test logs next. They were buried beneath medical clearance forms. The kind of data nobody reads unless they're trying to connect dots. Her G-force tolerance was logged at 9.3, sustained for 15 seconds. That wasn't admin level. That was elite pilot grade. Her recovery time was half the standard. Pulse and vision metrics flagged her as fit for fast attack profile loads. And then there was the neuro assessment. A single comment stood out. Coded and attached to a 2022 test at an unknown facility. Reflex loop response exceeds standard human latency curve by 2.7 sigma. No degradation under sustained load. At 0509, he accessed her encrypted file index. Most entries were locked under clearance levels beyond his own, but he could still see the headers: Project Phoenix Echo, Test Group GHX, Clearance ID Ghost, Hawk, Alpha. The classification labels were restricted to contractors or embedded government test assets. He'd seen them once, years ago, in a redacted drone interface white paper. They weren't handed out to desk officers. The last file that tipped it was a memo from 3 years ago. The body was redacted, but one phrase was left visible in the metadata preview: Pilot Reassignment to Asset Protection Program. Witness Secure Track Designation. Shadow. Active. It was dated 1 month before her personnel file started. Chen sat back in his chair. His pulse had crept up. He looked toward the window, where sunlight had started to streak over the concrete outside. He knew what this meant. She wasn't just qualified. She wasn't just hidden. She was someone the system had intentionally erased. Not for failure. For what she knew. Ghost Hawk wasn't a story. No, it wasn't myth. It was real. She was real. And she'd been right there, 20 feet away, filing reports while the rest of them played war games. At 11:42, the alarm cut through the control tower with a tone no one expected. The blue light above the secure channel began pulsing, and every console lit with the same word, unknown. Radar showed an object coming in fast. Mach 2. High altitude. No transponder. No reply on encrypted challenge frequencies. The track was direct, descending, and unmistakably on course for Edwards Air Force Base. Within seconds, voices spiked across the room. Technicians scrambled to verify telemetry. The officer of the day barked out asset availability, but the answer came back the same from every channel. All combat aircraft were airborne, 30 miles east, running joint training with Nellis. No intercepts in range, no drones fueled. Ground defenses were in standby maintenance rotation. The base, for all its aircraft, was wide open. Colonel Bradford stormed into the control room at 11:44, his jaw clenched. "Get me a flight line sit rep. Who's in the air?" "All ready assets are out, sir," the operations chief replied. "Closest bird that can fly is cold, in Bay 4. No pilot logged. We've got no one." That's when Sarah stepped forward. No one noticed her enter. She'd been in the admin room next door, listening through the open door like she always did. But now she walked straight toward the colonel, her uniform crisp, her boots silent on the tile. She held a sealed envelope in one hand. "Sir, I'm rated for intercept." Bradford turned, disbelief on his face. "This is not the time for games. Mitchell," her voice was calm. "Respectfully, sir, I suggest you read this." She handed him the envelope. It was sealed in red security tape with a Pentagon tracking barcode. He ripped it open, eyes scanning the page. His jaw slackened as he reached the signature line. It bore the name of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force and the seal of the Department of Defense. Captain Sarah Mitchell, Emergency Flight Clearance Authority, Active Authorization for Combat Deployment, Experimental Test Division, call sign Ghost Hawk. At 11:46, without waiting for a word from him, she turned and left the control room. Outside, the heat shimmered off the tarmac. The nearest F-16 sat silent under the hangar, fuel lines still connected. Power off. No startup crew. No assigned pilot. Sarah sprinted for it. A crew chief noticed her approaching and started waving her off. She didn't stop. She climbed the ladder, pulled the canopy release, and dropped into the cockpit with practiced motion. Within 10 seconds, her fingers flew across the controls. External power bypass, battery check, APU engaged. The system blinked to life under her hands like it remembered her. Her left thumb keyed the intercom. Clear Bay 4. Emergency launch in progress. On the tower feed, her voice caught everyone by surprise. Then came Bradford's call across the line. Clear runway 3. Let her go. The start sequence was textbook fast. Fuel flow steady. Turbine rotation past threshold. Firelight steady. She flipped on avionics, dialed in her vector by muscle memory. There was no checklist, no briefing, just instinct. At 11:49, she pushed the throttle forward and the F-16 rolled from its cradle like it had been waiting for her all along. At 11:52, Sarah Mitchell cleared the outer perimeter of Edwards airspace and broke past 35,000 feet. The F-16 roared under her control, its nose slicing the high desert sky like a blade. Air traffic control fed her target telemetry, but she was already adjusting. She didn't need the numbers. The intercept vector lived in her bones. At 11:53, she made visual. The drone shimmered in and out of radar signature, using next-gen stealth modulation. Its form was sleek, low profile, and unmistakable. She recognized the chassis, Prometheus model XR-29C. No human pilot, fully autonomous, no comms, no warning. It had come hunting. It matched her course instantly. The climb rate, the throttle modulation, the way it arced into a slow left roll. She'd flown that profile herself. They had built it from her data, programmed it using her telemetry, her test footage, her neural capture from flight simulations. It was her shadow, a machine that knew her better than anyone alive. She banked right hard at 14 Gs, pressing against the harness until her vision grayed at the edges. The drone followed without delay, matching her turn for turn. She reversed the roll, kicked in rudder, and dove under it at Mach 1.4. The turbulence rocked the canopy. Her pulse stayed even. Weapons were live. She flicked to AIM-9X sidewinders and swept left to break visual lock. The drone anticipated and kicked out a flare pattern that blurred the screen with heat bloom. She climbed into a vertical loop and dropped chaff to bait the AI's targeting system. The drone didn't fall for it. At 11:55, the drone fired a heat-seeking missile. She didn't flinch. Instead of diving away, she rolled into the missile's path and flew directly at it. The onboard AI hesitated. Its predictive matrix hadn't accounted for a head-on denial tactic at this altitude. The missile veered and detonated behind her in open air. She cut throttle for half a second and dove beneath the drone's belly. It reacted slower than expected. Not enough time to hit, but just enough to confirm her suspicion. Heat cycling during weapons deployment caused a minor IR flare on the drone's starboard heat exchanger. A weakness, 2-second exposure, small, but enough. She climbed again, inverted at 42,000 feet, and throttled into a snap barrel roll. Her skin burned, her hands shook, but she lined up the shot. She switched to cannon. No lock, no time. Manual fire. The moment the exchanger flashed red hot, she squeezed, her burst stitched clean into the exposed port. The drone jolted midair. She rolled again and came back around for confirmation. It dropped. Systems failed in sequence. The sleek Predator that had matched her every move spiraled downward, a $4.2 million machine folding into the Mojave like broken glass. At 11:57, she leveled out and made her descent. Breath controlled, systems stable. The runway appeared below her, lined with emergency crews, command staff, and stunned personnel. She touched down at 12:02. Smooth, centerline, no correction needed. As the canopy lifted, heat poured off her flight suit. Sweat ran down her neck. She climbed down the ladder without help. Bradford stood at the edge of the line. He didn't speak. Sarah walked past him without pause, her voice steady. "Request permission to resume desk duty, sir." At 14:15, base security teams retrieved the downed drone's black box from a crater east of the runway. It was scorched, partially fragmented, but intact. Within 24 hours, intelligence analysts decrypted its logs. The findings triggered an immediate lockdown on internal communications. A private briefing followed. By 10:00 the next morning, Colonel Bradford was in handcuffs. The data trail was clear. A classified message had left his terminal 3 days prior, routed through an encrypted proxy. The recipient was a contractor shell linked to Prometheus Defense Corporation. The message contained Sarah Mitchell's current assignment, schedule, and flight access codes. When questioned, Bradford claimed he had been leveraging classified intel for career advancement. His charges included espionage, endangering federal personnel, and complicity in an assassination attempt on a protected witness. News moved slowly. The official report would never reach the public in full. But inside the military, the story spread faster than orders. Ghost Hawk wasn't a myth anymore. She had a name, a face, a file that could no longer be hidden. Her call sign was reinstated. Her flight status returned. She was offered a command slot at the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, an advisory role at the Pentagon, even a position on the Joint Special Access Oversight Board. She declined them all. At 08:10 on Monday, she walked into the same admin office she had worked in for months. Her desk was clean, her coffee still black, her posture unchanged. She filed reports. She checked logs. She corrected fuel estimates with a red pen. No one questioned her again. But behind that quiet return was something else. Sarah had already contacted a nonprofit that specialized in educational access for underserved indigenous communities. She funded a new initiative in full, the Ghost Hawk Aviation Scholarship. No ceremony. No press. The only requirement the recipients had to be Native American women who wanted to fly. By year's end, 5 had enrolled in flight programs across the country. Sarah asked for nothing. No recognition. No name on the website. She wasn't building legacy. She was leaving space for others to rise. She understood something. Most never would. Strength wasn't loud. It didn't ask to be seen. Sometimes, it sat in the back of a room and said nothing. And when it stood, it changed everything. At 13:32, the alert came over the comm during a routine intercept drill. Simulated hostile aircraft had entered the training zone. Response protocols engaged, but one voice didn't respond. Second Lieutenant Jessica Yazzie sat in her trainer jet, hands frozen on the stick. Her voice was clipped when it finally came through. Control. This is Yazzie. I've lost the pattern. Inside the tower, Sarah Mitchell stood behind the shift lead, arms crossed loosely. No one asked her to step in. She just leaned forward, keyed the mic, and spoke softly. You're at Angels 12, 3 clicks east. Trim left 2 degrees. Ease your throttle. Trust your eyes. Yazzie blinked. The voice wasn't commanding. It wasn't urgent. It just sounded like it knew. She adjusted. Found the horizon again. Her breathing steadied. Sarah kept guiding. You're clear to track. Target is at your 1 o'clock. Simulated vector confirmed. Lock in now. Yazzie made the turn. Locked her training system on the target drone. The drill ended seconds later with a confirmed intercept. On the ground. Her instructor praised her resolve. Yazzie nodded politely, but her eyes drifted toward the tower. Later that evening, she stayed behind near the admin offices. She passed by Sarah's desk, watching her mark up weather data like she had every day. Sarah looked up once, gave a quiet nod. Nothing more. Weeks later, Yazzie found herself standing in the locker area, waiting for a late briefing. Her eyes caught on an open locker, half-shadowed. Inside, hanging on a single hook, was a worn dream catcher. Simple, hand-tied, faded blue threads. It looked like it had been there for years. Yazzie didn't ask. She didn't need to. Some legacies were written in combat reports and citations. Others whispered through stories told over coffee or passed down between pilots who'd flown close to greatness. Sarah never claimed credit. She didn't wear medals, didn't give speeches, but she had shown Yazzie something that no manual could teach. That real strength didn't chase spotlight. It stood ready in silence. It chose when to be seen. And sometimes, when the sky opened wide and the moment called for more than courage, that kind of strength became everything. The locker door clicked shut. The dreamcatcher swayed once, then stilled.